Now I'd like to introduce, pleased to introduce Dr. Alex Chernis, Superintendent of the San Marino Schools, Lauren Kleinrock, a former superintendent and the current secretary of the City Club, and Matthew Medrano, who is with the UCLA Center X project, who will discuss the implementation of the new next generation science standards in the San Marino schools. While many of us know a lot about the changes in the schools resulting from Common Core, most of us know little about the new state standards that are now being implemented in our schools. 2013, California adopted the next generation science standards called NGSS, which all school districts in the state are required to adopt. NGSS describes a new set of standards based on research on how children learn best. Teachers are expected to support the learning that helps students think on their own, problem solve, communicate, and collaborate. The standards require science and engineering be taught in every grade from kindergarten through grade 12. The implementation of NGSS in San Marino schools, the district is partnering with UCLA's Center X project for science, a highly respected resource for professional development training. Center X providing the necessary professional development for teachers and administrators to offer a science program that will enable students not only to maintain but also enhance their traditionally high performance in science. Messrs. Chernis, Kleinrock, and Medrano will review how the new standards are being implemented, how teacher and administrator training will foster these changes, and how student progress will be assessed. Please welcome Dr. Chernis.
Good evening. So, Superintendent Kleinrock, you can go ahead and ask your questions.
It's not actually like getting president. You don't carry the title after you're...
Sure you do. Sure you do.
And before I get started, I do want to say in all sincerity, I guess I got to pick it up. I do want to say in all sincerity that, not every superintendent would have the confidence to be able to bring back his predecessor and give him a job, because he's got to trust me that I'm not going to go around telling people how things should really be done. And I actually have been faithful to that, but I appreciate his confidence. And he has been very supportive of the implementation and very supportive of my trying to bring it in. So with that, California does require all public school districts to implement the next generation science standard. It's a law. And as you also know, our district has done very, very well under the old system of teaching science. So the question for Dr. Chernis is how he sees this implementation, positive or negative for our school district.
So let me just start by saying that, Lauren, we very much appreciated you coming back to the school district. And I think that you've brought a lot of talent and experience to...
you writing this down, Mitch? Because that's not what you said at all. Yeah. Not for me, he had a different approach.
And so no, it really has been, it's been to our benefit, so thank you. The world of education is changing, and it's changing dramatically. The worlds of technology have now infiltrated everything we do and everything our children do. I want to share with you some statistics here. So Department of Labor, 2014, the top 10 in-demand jobs didn't exist in 2004. So we're currently preparing our students today for jobs in the future that haven't existed yet. We're preparing them to solve problems that haven't been presented yet. And we're preparing them to use technologies that haven't been invented yet. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by changing the way that we teach kids, and it's different than the way that all of you learned. Technology, as I mentioned, the use of technology by our students is incredible, and in many cases our students are better equipped with the technology than our teachers and our parents. I'm not sure if you know this, there's 845, can you guys hear me back here?
That's right.
Okay. 845 million Facebook accounts right now. 50 million tweets per day. Half of those are the president. That's the only political comment I'll make. There's 31 billion Google searches per month. Now, 10 years ago, there were 2 billion Google searches per month. So you can see what's happening. And there's more texts being received and sent than there are humans on this earth. And that's on a daily basis. So how do we prepare our students? What was the question? I got so excited about the data here.
That's good, I like that. What do you think the impact on San Marino will be, positive or negative, making this change?
Yeah, so it's going to be very positive. And we have experts here that are going to get into the details around what is next generation science standards. It sounds like Star Trek, right? The next generation. But what it really is expanding upon the Common Core. And I'm going to speak to the Common Core in a minute as well. It's teaching students to be critical thinkers, to be able to problem solve, to be able to take concepts and apply them. And in the case of science, a great example is in middle school science, we've always traditionally had earth science, 6th grade, life science, 7th grade, physical science in 8th grade. And what next generation science is doing is it's embedding all 3 of those concepts into a 6th grade science, a 7th grade science, and an 8th grade science. Because sciences are dynamic. And we no longer teach in a linear basis. And so that's kind of the same theme that has to do with Common Core as well.
Okay. And that segues neatly into, totally unplanned, of course, the question of, is next generation science standards Common Core? Even hearing people talk tonight, there's some confusion about whether it's part of the Common Core or not. So what are your thoughts on that?
So no, but it's aligned. So the Common Core is specific to English language arts and mathematics. And it's new sets of standards, and it includes performance-based assessment. And so a great example is for mathematics. You know, instead of teaching somebody to figure out what 2 plus 2 is, right? We teach the students to not just learn that concept, but apply it. So we say, you have a $5 bill, hot dogs cost $2, how many hot dogs can you buy? So you are still learning to add, but you're applying it to real life situations. So students need to be able to go beyond just learning a performance task, but they have to be able to apply that as well. So Common Core, think of Common Core as math and English, and think of it as going beyond just rote memorization, but being able to apply knowledge, higher level thinking skills, being able to demonstrate. In mathematics, there's a lot more literacy, so there's writing in mathematics. So it's not just memorization. You need to be able to explain how do you understand this concept to be, explain your thinking. So these skills that we're trying to teach our students, the goal is that they translate well into the future, into careers, into college, and students have the skills to be able to adapt and demonstrate knowledge. And like I mentioned before, when new jobs present themselves, when new technologies present themselves, our students, we hope, will have skills to be able to adapt to whatever they need to and be flexible and be critical thinkers.
He actually did a good job.
You're surprised. Yeah.
Matthew, do we have the, no? Okay, and Dr. Chernis hit it perfectly right. It is state law. One of the analogies I've come across is you can read about how to ride a bike. That's not riding a bike. Doesn't mean you know that you can do that. This is not a criticism, though it will sound like it. I've been in a lot of science classrooms over a lot of years, mostly at the high school, a little bit at the middle school. And we have great science teachers teaching the way science has been traditionally taught. And what that would typically mean in a high school science class, for example, is the teacher's going to lecture, which these days means discussions and questions and not just talking, but they're going to lecture. And then it's going to come time to do a lab. And the teacher is going to design the lab. And the teacher is going to give the kids the directions for the lab. And the teacher is going to set up the lab. And then the kids are going to do the lab following directions. They'll take their measurements, and it either did or didn't work. And there might be some discussion as to why. That's not doing science. That's not what scientists do. And so a lot of this is on, as Dr. Chernis said, learning how to ask questions. I got a few, well, first of all, I'll give you another object lesson here. Our math teachers also are very good, and our kids are great at math as a group compared to most schools. I was in a math class one day doing an observation. The teacher had finished teaching whatever they're doing, showing to work the equation, put another problem on the board and asked the class, all right, I told the class, I want you to solve this. And the reaction of the class was, but you haven't taught us how to do that yet. How are we supposed to do it? There was no, I'll use the term habit of mind, that said, well, what do I already know? How can I figure out what I need to do from what I know? And that's showing that there's a flaw in what we're having kids learn. Questions. I used to say, I didn't know I was in better company than myself. I used to tell the staff that, you know what, we do a pretty doggone good job of getting teachers to find the answers to the questions we ask them. We don't do much to teach them how to ask the right questions. So a few quotes. What people think of as the moment of discovery is really the discovery of the question. That was Jonas Salk. He had a pretty profound effect on the way we do things. The other one is what we observe in nature is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. A guy named Werner Heisenberg, I never heard him, but he won the Nobel Prize in 1932, way back then, for his theory of quantum mechanics. A pretty bright guy. This was an interesting one. Computers are useless. They can only give you answers. And that was Pablo Picasso, of all people. And then perhaps the most profound one, we thought we had the answers. It was the questions we had wrong. That was a noted philosopher, Bono, from U2. So basically, you get the point here. All right, let's see if I can remember how to work this here. All right, so what's new? To counter what I just described, NGSS is designed to have kids figure out, not just by themselves, working collaboratively, as scientists do, what the reasons for things are. And they use the term phenomena, which is just anything that happens in nature. Okay, and one of the first lessons I saw, for example, was a question. There was a couple of beakers of water. One was salt water, one was fresh water. And there was a kind of bowl of ice on the table, and the presenter said, all right, I want you to think about in which solution, salt or not, the ice is going to melt faster. All right, well, I'm sitting at a table. There's a big convention. I'm sitting at a table with 7 other people. 5 of them are high school science teachers. One of them is an administrator like me trying to figure out what this is all about. The guy I'm sitting next to me is kind of like a ringer. He's a science expert who supervises schools in LA Unified. So the teachers are talking. I don't know the answer to this stuff, so I'm going to do what kids would do. I pull out my phone. I'm going to look it up. He leans in my ear, and he says, you're going to find it there, but you're going to find a lot of wrong answers. Sure enough, I found a study they'd done with 8 UCSB graduate students who came up with the wrong answer. All right, so teachers are talking, and they come up with, at least they thought about, well, where do we associate salt and ice and snow? And it's like, well, you know, when the roads are icy or snow, you salt them and the water runs away, so it's going to melt faster in the salt water. Well, that's logical. But that wasn't the end of the exploration. There was some red dye on the table. And he said, all right, why don't you put a drop or two, whatever it was, into the beakers and watch what happens. And it sinks to the bottom, but then it starts coming back up. Why? Because the warmer air will rise as it comes back up. And as you're observing it, it doesn't happen the way you think it would. So to make the long story short, it starts to melt faster in the fresh water, but what happens when the ice melts in the salt water, it creates a thermal layer of salt. So the warmer water coming back up doesn't get to the ice to melt it as quickly. So in the long run, the ice melts more slowly. The guy next to me leans in and whispers, that's the colligate property of solvents. Okay, so there is some real science behind this stuff. It's not just conjecture. And then what really is important about that phenomenon is it relates to something important either in the kids' lives or the real world. And in this case, he said, all right, so where in nature do we find ice coming in contact with salt water on a significant basis? Well, the glaciers. The glaciers are in the water, they're melting, they are in the ocean, it's salt water, and the same thing is happening in the oceans. Because when that warmer water starts to come back up, it can't get to the surface. You might think, well, that's good, it doesn't melt the glaciers. But I didn't know this. There are underground rivers that run through our oceans. And now it's taking this warm water to other places that didn't have this warm water before, and it changes the environment of that. But the whole point is the kids, and in these cases it was teachers, but the kids have to think about what can cause these things. But it also ties in, it's not just kids guessing. There's real science behind it, and the teacher still has an integral role in that real science. I'm going to let Matthew's going to talk more about three-dimensional learning, but one of the big differences is it's not just teaching ideas, or what are now called disciplinary core ideas. It's also introducing science and engineering concepts to be able to do something with the knowledge, and what they call, and that may be, I'll just give a simple example, looking for cause and effect. Okay, every science, doesn't matter what it is, there's cause and effect. And kids have to learn that you need to be looking for these cause and effects as you're trying to solve things. Building K-12 progressions, it starts in kindergarten, it moves up through the 12th grade, and the performance standards, performance expectations, which are now our standards, it's not just what you know, it's how can you demonstrate what you know. It's really, except for first and second grade and a few topics, the same performance standards K through 12. Now they get more sophisticated as time goes by, and the real end piece is, can the kids meet the exit performance standards in grade 12? So there's an integration that has to go on between kindergarten and 12th grade, and that's challenging. Now it's not Common Core, but it does align with Common Core. Specifically, for example, the English language arts standards require English teachers to teach kids to read non-fictional material, and specifically to read historical primary documents. They don't have to be the whole documents, a paragraph, a page, whatever, and be able to make sense of what is there and to write about it. And so similarly, social studies needs to be providing those kind of materials to the English teachers. Same thing happens with math. There's obviously more common tie-in between math and science, but it's there. It's specifically expressed in the standards. And linking instructional materials to sustain professional growth. It's always a challenge, where I, not being born yesterday, figure, you know what? Better have somebody doing this that really knows what they're doing. So through my network of people in other school districts, higher performing school districts, I started to ask around, and the name Center X out of UCLA kept popping up. And so I made that contact there, and we have some people who know what they're doing. It's one of the more active professional development. They don't even have, I won't even tell you how many of these presentations they do, but we were very fortunate to get them. Okay. Where did this stuff, or from where did this stuff come? You noticed I used the correct English up there. And nobody cares about the preposition at the end of the sentence anymore, but I had to do that. I've heard everybody from teachers to parents to others saying, you know what, why should we be doing this stuff? Our kids have always been successful doing what we're doing. Who says this is a better way? Well, one entity is the National Academy of Sciences. It's considered to be the most prestigious scientific membership in this country. You don't just get in. You got to be nominated by prestigious scientists that are already there to get in. The National Research Council is the staff arm, the research arm of the National Academy of Sciences. They worked on the standards. The Academy put together what's called the framework. I won't get into detail, and Matthew can do that if he wants. But the Research Council put together these standards, the performance standards. National Science Teachers Association, yeah, teachers' opinions count. And the National Science Teachers Association bought into these. American Association for the Advancement of Science is the largest science organization in the world. 91 different countries contribute scientists to that. Achieve is a nonprofit that has worked with states in all subjects, academic disciplines, to improve academic learning for kids to attend college or careers. The National Research Committee convened 18 nationally known scientists. There was 2 Nobel laureates on that. These are smart people. They created design teams in the 4 major sciences, as you hear. So it's not like, well, who says this should work? You got our best and brightest scientists saying business as usual is not what they think we should be doing. I saw a quote, I wish I could remember who it was, but it was a university professor who said, you know what? Kids come to us, they know a lot of stuff, a lot of facts, but they don't know how to do science. We have to teach them how to do science. Well, that shouldn't happen as we get into this. Okay, then what? Well, Achieve led the states in developing K-12 standards. I'll skip to the bottom. Common Core, when it came out, people said, well, you know, Washington and those people, they just want to run the whole country. Common Core was not created by Washington. The Next Generation Science Standards, Washington had nothing to do with that. These are the governors of the states that were looking for a better way to educate their students, because business and industry was saying, we're not getting the quality of workers we need moving into the 21st century. There were K-12 science teachers. In California, we had, I think the number was 28 of what were considered to be top university professors, professional scientists, and K-12 science teachers. Stakeholders, there were multiple choices for multiple opportunities for public feedback, and people certainly presented that feedback, so it was well vetted. And again, when you want to hear somebody say, who says that's better? Well, you can tell them who says that's better. Yeah, they have been internationally benchmarked. They looked at the countries that typically perform the best in terms of high school students in the world. There is the 2 organizations. TEMS is the Trends in Mathematics and Science Studies, and the PISA is a performance in science achievement. And they looked at these countries you see on the screen, and yeah, this is consistent with what they've been doing out in front of where we are now. So we're not going this alone. 21st century learning skills, I've looked at all the 4, I'll call them core courses, not to be confused with Common Core, math, English, social studies, science. They're all taking the same approach. There are specific differences within them, but it's all an inquiry based on questions, research, the ability to come up with reasoned conclusions, and it is in fact designed for the 20th century, and as Dr. Chernis alluded to, because we're hearing the statistics that he shared with you. We don't know what's going to be required. We do no matter what's required, it's going to take kids who can think, analyze, they have skills in communication, they collaborate. Science these days is not an independent endeavor. There's collaboration in the research, there's collaboration in the engineering, it's international, okay? It's a whole different ballgame from what it once was. The heart of the matter, something called CER, and you see it again in every one of these subjects, and basically it's the ability to make a claim based on what you see. Think of the beakers of water. Be able to share and come up with the evidence you have that justifies why you're making that claim, and be able to present the rationale or reasoning why it's a logical conclusion. I hate to say this, but sometimes it's referred to, sorry Kelly, it's not a bad thing really, a law school education. Because that's what you see in a lot. It's a stand and deliver. What's your position on this case? What are the facts that you're using to support it? How can you make that conclusion based on these facts? So that's what we need to do. And that's what this is supposed to do. And why now? Science education is just central to our lives these days. You don't have to be a scientist. Think of all that you hear in today's world about climate change. Man-made, not man-made. Think about the laws that are based on that environmental science. We're not scientists, but we have to vote on things, and we need, to the best of our ability, the ability to analyze those things and what makes sense. It prepares students to be knowledgeable consumers. You ever try to read the ingredients on a packaged good? I mean, you know, it would help a little bit to know which of those are good and which of those are bad and how to find those answers. To compete in the global economy, as Dr. Chernis talked about, it's technology changing all the time, the ability to lead in science, to come up with the inventions, the cutting edge things. We don't want to take a backseat. We had the luxury for a long time of getting scientists and engineers from India and from China because this is where the education was better and the opportunities were. We're not getting them anymore. They're staying at home in larger numbers because their economies have rebounded and they can stay there and do what they need to do. So we need, bottom line, and know for our kids, a solid education that prepares them for college and for career. And I think it's important to understand both of those. A long time ago I came across something that I wish I, again, had invented, but I hadn't. But it was a phrase that our job as teachers is not to provide kids simply for more education, it's to provide kids for life. And we're seeing with these kind of approaches, that's what we're doing. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Matthew Medrano from UCLA Center X. He has been doing the bulk of the training for our teachers. He's a gold mine for us of knowledge, and he's going to tell you what's really behind all this stuff, because I didn't tell you the truth.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Dr. Chernis. To tell you the truth, you got some experts here because they've taken the whole show, but I'll try to add some new light and kind of open up and tell you a little bit more about NGSS. Before that, I do want to send the best wishes from Lynn. Unfortunately, she got called away and is up in Sacramento. It's kind of hard to see. Lynn Kim Jong is our director at Center X, and she really wished that she could be here tonight, but unfortunately her business working in science and the National Science Foundation and a lot of her other projects took her away this evening. But I send her best wishes, and just a little bit about me. My name is Matthew Medrano. I actually was born and raised here in the San Gabriel Valley, right next door in Alhambra. And I'm pretty sure this Kelly Ryan over here is the same Kelly Ryan that taught me physiology and anatomy in high school. Not a ringer, but it took a second. Oh, shoot, darn. So I'm very familiar with the area, very familiar with San Marino. I did very well in the babysitting business in San Marino. So I'm very excited to be back and be here working with wonderful teachers, a wonderful community, and to hopefully answer some more questions that you might have. So I'm going to keep it pretty short and really leave it open to try and answer the burning questions that you have. But before we do that, one of the things that I really love is just to kind of get actively engaged. So this is just a little activity called Memory Lane. So what I'd like you to do is think about your fondest science memory. And if you can, just kind of try to sum that up into one word. Just give you a few seconds to think about that. My fondest science memory was sitting at home listening to K-Rock Acoustic Christmas and splicing out the commercials. And if you have a cell phone with you today, I'm going to ask you to if you would take that out, you can also peek at the Dodgers score. I think it's still 2-1 Dodgers, but I'm not too sure. 3-1 Dodgers? All right. So if you take out your cell phone and go ahead and open up your text message app. And the number that you're going to text is right here, 22333. There will be no additional charges on your bill. We're not storing any of your information. And then in the body of the text, go ahead and put Matthew Medra 285. And then go ahead and send that message. It's just going to interface with the polling system that I'll be using. And then you should get a message back that says, all right, you're in your presenter's poll. And if you could just go ahead and once you get a confirmation that you're in the poll, send that one word that you came up with as being your fondest science memory.
You might want to spell it out too, because I don't think I see it in that.
Yeah, I'll go back one more time. So again, you're sending it to the phone number 22333. And then in the text message, the first text message you're going to send, you're going to write Matthew Medra 285, which is MATTHEWMEDRA 285, no spaces. And then just hit send. You should hopefully quickly get back a message that says it worked. And then you should be able to text that one word that's your fondest memory. Ah, here we go. It looks like we have some already up on the board here. And so we call this a word graph or a wordle. And the way this works is the larger the text, the more common the response. So right now we see fire as the largest one. So it looks like there's a lot of people in this room who have a memory of fire. Okay, and so you might get a message, depending on how many people have submitted responses already, that the poll is full, so it does get to a point. But one of the things that we're probably noticing up here is we don't see lecture, we don't see looking up definitions, we don't see practice, right? We see the stuff that really ingrains in our memories, and that's the active learning. We see a lot of activities. We see a lot of interesting things. We see a lot of us making sense of the world around us. And that's exactly what this shift in science is all about. Moving to a more active learner and moving toward making these science memories that are going to stick and be usable. So if we just look at the way that students learn, the idea is really basic and has not changed over the years. And that's that students typically learn by play. They learn by interacting. They learn by doing things. I remember being on the tables and the chairs and laying down as we were learning the different planes of physiology, and touching as we were learning about the various bones within the skull or within the arm. So these are all techniques that allow students to hold on to the content that they're looking at. And as we look at the research from the National Research Council, we find that students who pursue science, math, engineering, typically have memorable moments, hands-on experience, activities where they actually get to interact as scientists, engineers, or mathematicians. And as Dr. Chernis alluded to, the biggest growing industry are going to be those STEM jobs over the next decade. About 25% of all new jobs are going to involve some type of science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. And we need to prepare our students for that. We need to prepare them for the jobs that don't exist. My career before teaching was actually working in wireless. I worked on a team that built innovative cell phones. Now at that time, this was probably about 10 to 12 years ago. Innovative cell phones were the first phone in which you could have GPS navigation, like turn-by-turn navigation on your phone, which now we're like, I wouldn't buy one if it didn't have it. We were the first to have a full slide-out QWERTY keyboard. Nobody uses a QWERTY keyboard anymore, unfortunately. We just talk to our phone, or we've become very proficient with typing on our touch screens. And we had the first phone that could update to MySpace. Yes, MySpace. But I share that with you because I didn't learn anything about cell phones in high school. Not one single thing. I didn't learn about anything related to cell phones when I was in high school. And physics, we didn't really touch, aside from some basic circuits, we really didn't touch too much about waves and how we might communicate with waves. And part of that is because the technology was just starting to exist, right? There was no Wi-Fi. We didn't think about that. Voice phones had just come out and were very expensive. They were not ubiquitous, right? Just shortly after the pager. And so what we need to think about in science is, how do we prepare students? How do we prepare our children for these jobs that are not going to exist? And how do we make sure that they're going to be able to compete? And so one of the ways we do that is through NGSS. NGSS is specifically less step-by-step instruction and more explanation. Less teacher presenting and more students presenting. Less discussion about one right answer and more discussion about all the possible right answers. The idea is that students are making the connections themselves. They're no longer becoming passive learners, they're becoming active learners. Because we know that our students nowadays are they get bored and they turn on a screen. It might be a tablet, it might be a big 60-inch television at home, it could be just an iPhone that they have in their pocket. But we're no longer climbing on our roofs and jumping off them when we get bored. We're not climbing up into the avocado tree and sending a rope down so that we can pretend we're firefighters. Just kids aren't playing like that nowadays. And so we want to bring that back, although we probably won't climb in trees and scale them down like firefighters. But we want to bring back that active learning experience so that students can have more time to critically think, more time to collaborate, more time to build communication skills, because a lot of our students can go through an entire day without communicating with one single person. And NGSS allows us to stop that. So we're not going to be so concerned with this document back here, but I want to just point out how this is going to be achieved. And this is achieved through, in NGSS, what we call three-dimensional learning. And we liken this learning to a rope. So a rope is made up of multiple strands to make the rope stronger. NGSS has taken the same approach. So these different strands are what we call 3D learning, or the 3 dimensions of science. So we have the science and engineering practices. These are the things that scientists and engineers engage in on a regular basis. They might be building models. They might be creating and carrying out experiments. They might be collecting and analyzing data. They might be arguing from evidence. There's 8 different practices, and those are always coded as these blue objects that you see in the framework behind me. Disciplinary core ideas, which are coded as orange. Those disciplinary core ideas, or DCIs as we call them, that's the content. That is the actual scientific content specific to earth science, life science, physical science, and engineering, whatever it might be. And then the last one is the cross-cutting concepts. Cross-cutting concepts, we kind of think of these as themes, and these are reoccurring themes that we see throughout the disciplines in science. So as Lauren talked about cause and effect, we see cause and effect in life science, in physical science, and in earth science. Patterns, we see those across all the sciences. So we're using these cross-cutting concepts to tie all of our sciences together. So these 3 dimensions make up what we refer to in NGSS as 3-dimensional learning. So why these specifically, and why do they tie into what our students are going to need? Well, if we look at the most recent data from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and they sent out a survey asking colleges and employers, what is it that you're looking for in potential students that you're admitting, or potential candidates that you're going to be hiring. And this is just a small sample from the entire list. But if we just look at the top 3 or 4, leadership, ability to work in a team, communication skills, problem-solving skills, these are things that our students today, our kids today, have a hard time doing, because they do not practice these right now in their everyday life. And it's not their fault. It's the evolution of society. It's the evolution that we've taken as we've advanced technology. And so one of the things that the NGSS hopes to do is to bring back those skills and allow students to engage in those in the classroom. And it cannot be done via lecture. It needs to be done via more active experiences. Does that mean that lecture should be taken out completely? No, not at all. We still are relying on our teachers who are content experts to guide our students, and if needed, give that direct instruction or that lecture when appropriate. But the idea here is, let's let them struggle a little. In education, we call it the zone of proximal development. That's where you put it just out of reach so that that struggle creates connections and neurons in the brain, but not so far out of reach that the student just gives up completely. And that is what we're asking for in NGSS. By practicing these skills, by using this 3D learning, our hope is to meet the needs of college and employers. So these skills that you see up here are probably things that we practice on an everyday basis in our careers, and these are also the 8 science and engineering practices that scientists and engineers engage in on a daily basis. So to kind of bring it all into focus, and I think it was Dr. Chernis who talked about the linear nature that we've taught in the past. We're moving away from this linear nature, which most of us are probably familiar with when it comes to science, and we're moving into this, what we call the 3-sphere science model. And this more accurately depicts how scientists engage, excuse me, scientists and engineers engage in science on a regular basis. So these 3 spheres: investigating, evaluating, developing explanations and solutions. And then within there are sub-skills that are related to those 3 spheres specifically. But scientists are moving in and out of these spheres on a daily basis as they interact with colleagues, as they interact with colleagues around the world, as they interact with the experiments themselves. So what this model might look like in the classroom is pretty simple. We call it think, do, explain. Basically, we ask the students, as scientists, what questions do you have? What do you think about what might be going on here? And it might be something as simple as showing a video about the parrots that fly around San Gabriel Valley every morning and wake us up. It could be something as simple as that, a local phenomena. It could be something maybe a little bit bigger. Why have we had so many wildfires recently? That might be a question. We could even move it onto a global scale. But the idea is to get students to start thinking like scientists and think about problems that we face every day and how we might solve those problems. Then we're going to do some activities. The students are going to come up with some investigations that might allow them to uncover some of the answers to that particular phenomena or to some of their questions. And then they're going to make discoveries and communicate that learning. So they're going to communicate with each other. Based on this phenomena and these investigations we've done, this is what we've learned, this is what we think is going on. And the entire time, the expert in the room, the teacher, is guiding so that students are not moving in the wrong direction or not learning maybe bad science or learning incorrect science. So the teacher's there to guide them, to make sure they're using appropriate sources, to make sure they're using legitimate information, to make sure that they're crafting arguments that make sense. And the idea here is to make these experiences memorable, because these then will be skills and ideas that students hold on to. Just a quick snapshot, if we look at the standards, one of the common misconceptions is that NGSS is watering down science because it's not as specific to what needs to be learned. If we look at the 1997 standard, which is this bullet point here, we can see that is very specific. It tells you what students need to know, A, B, C, D. Unfortunately, that became a checklist. That became a checklist for a lot of classrooms where I'm now going to let you know that plants and animals inhabit different kinds of environments and have external features that help them thrive. I just taught you that. I'm going to check it off my list. Not that that's exactly how it happened, and especially that's how it happens here in San Marino. But it's an oversimplification. So if we look at the corresponding standard via NGSS, students will use materials to design a solution to a human problem by mimicking how plants and/or animals use their external parts to help them survive, grow, and meet their needs. So they're now actually taking this information and they're applying it. But not only that, they're applying it as a solution to a problem that already exists. And so this is the idea that we are not learning science just to learn science. It's helpful to be informed, but we're learning science to help solve future problems. And so this might be something like creating prosthesis for an individual who has lost a limb. This could be something like, we know that global temperatures are rising. How might we look to how our animal or plant counterparts deal with climate change and allow that to create solutions for us as humans? I'm going to try and play this. I'm going to try and move the mic here because while this is novel, we're not the first to make this shift. So this was a news story that was just on NPR a couple months ago, and this is the Vermont Medical School Larner College, who in 2016 was ranked the 29th best medical school in the United States, tied with Duke and Hopkins. So no slouch. And they have actually made a transition, not in all their classes, but in some of their classes, and a majority of their classes have made a transition away from lecture and more toward this idea of interactive learning. And it's just a short, we'll see if we can get the audio working here. And it's just a short clip with one of the professors who's leading the charge there.
For most students starting medical school, the first year can mean a lot of time in a lecture.
Is that coming through?
But when the new class of medical students begins at the University of Vermont next week, a lot of that learning won't be done with professors standing at the front of a room.
I should point out that no one loves lectures better than I do.
Is that sarcasm? Dr. William Jeffers is one of the medical school's deans, and that wasn't sarcasm.
There's two books out there that are pretty prominent on how to be a teacher in medical school. And actually, I am the author of the chapter on lectures in both books.
So it might come as a surprise that Dr. Jeffries is leading an effort at the University of Vermont's medical school to get rid of lectures by 2019. I asked him why.
We're finding out a lot from the neuroscience of learning that the brain needs to accumulate the information, but then also organize it and create an internal story that makes the knowledge make sense. When you just tell somebody something, the chances of them remembering it diminishes over time. But if you are required to use that information, chances are you'll remember it much better.
Give us an example of a topic in terms of how it would be taught in a traditional lecture versus how it would be taught in the model you're planning to use moving forward.
So a good example would be the teaching of what we would call pharmacokinetics. And pharmacokinetics is the science of drug delivery. A lot of the science of pharmacokinetics is simply mathematical equations. And if you have a lecture, it's maybe giving examples of how they work. In an active learning setting, you expect the students to learn about the equations before they get there. And when you get into the classroom setting, the students work in groups solving pharmacokinetic problems. So cases are presented where the patient gets a drug in a certain dose at a certain time, and those are the types of things where you're expecting the student to know the knowledge in order to use the knowledge, and then they don't forget it.
You've already started paring down the amount of lectures that make up the curriculum. You don't have to name names, but has there been any pushback?
Certainly we've gotten some pushback, but what I tell the average clinical faculty member is that, okay, if you like doing appendectomies using an old method because you like it and you're really good at it, but it's really not the best method for the patient, would you do it? And of course the answer is always no. And then you turn around and say, well, this method of teaching is actually not as good as other methods. Would you do that? When confronted with a question like that, medical faculty typically tend to understand and agree.
Dr. Jeffries, I just want to ask one more thing. You mentioned having written this chapter on lecturing as a class-written tool. Are you kind of bummed?
Well, I am sorry that I have to give up the Bill Jeffries show. And when I get up and give lectures, that is a great source of personal enjoyment. But I think when you start to do active learning methods, you can see the input that the students are giving each other, and it can be a very rewarding experience either way.
And in the end, the goal is to have better doctors, right? And that's where you think this is headed.
So the fiduciary responsibility of the medical school is to patients. And so we are bound by a code and by a bond with our patients that we will always try to produce the best doctors. And if that means changing our teaching methods, then we'll certainly do that.
Well, Dr. William Jeffries, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you, Audie.
Dr. William Jeffries is Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education at the University of Vermont's Larner College of Medicine.
All right, so I think Dr. Jeffries gives a very good example when he talks about appendectomies. And especially nowadays, you know, with laparoscopic procedures, there's no need to actually cut open and increase the amount of recovery time needed. So if we were to go to a doctor who was going to say, you know, we're not going to do laparoscopic, we're going to, you know, cut you open, we might have some questions as to why that might be a better choice. And so it's the same comparison here. We're moving away from something tried and true that we are used to, but we're doing it because it's going to allow us to go from good to great. And in San Marino's case, from great to greater. So there's some additional examples just up here in the back that this is happening all over secondary ed. And so this is really important because as our students move through, we want to make sure they're prepared. And so while this may not be happening at all universities right now, for students that we have that might be in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade, this might be commonplace by the time they get to college. And so this shift is very important, and it is a shift that's going to be happening from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, as Lauren talked about. This is a progression of science, and at San Marino, just a little bit about what we're doing with Center X. We are working with teachers, K through 12, so that we know who's responsible for what the progressions are going to look like, what are some of the expectations of science from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school. We're currently working with a cohort of teachers that we started with over the summer. They're doing lesson study, which means they're going to be transforming their lessons from the 1997 standards to the next generation science standards, and then they'll be implementing these in their classrooms, and just like scientists, they'll be doing research. There'll be a team of observers who will be observing what's happening in the classroom. We'll then debrief after, look at the student data, look at what students were able to do well and what they might have had trouble with, before we'll then tweak that lesson and then deliver it again to, collect and collect more data, debrief, and tweak the lesson again. And we'll continue to do that until we've made the complete transition. So with that, I would like to take any questions you might have. Yes?
How is this impacting the structure of classes? Do you still have biology, chemistry, and physics, or are you changing the structure around? Maybe time limits, maybe having short periods and long periods, or
Yeah.
what are you doing about that?
So the question is, how is instruction changing in the classroom? Like, do we still have biology, chemistry, physics? You know, how does that work? So there's a couple different models that can be adopted. Currently, the model that we're basing our lesson study on is called the integrated model, or the 3-course model at the high school level. So there is still biology, physics, and chemistry. However, we'll be integrating the tenets of earth science within there. So in biology, they'll be looking at the typical biological curriculum, but tying it in directly and more closely with the earth science behind it. Same things in chemistry and physics. The biggest change is at the middle school, where they're moving away from a discipline-specific model to an integrated approach, where they will study multiple disciplines of science every year, as opposed to one discipline at a time. Yes?
This sounds very exciting for students to be learning. My question is, how do we prepare our teachers to teach this way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're already taking the first step, and that's by bringing in the. Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, how are we preparing our teachers for this shift? It sounds great and exciting for students. How do we prepare our teachers? So we have an initial cohort that is working right now to figure out what that plan looks like for San Marino, because that plan looks different from district to district. So part of that is lesson study, looking at where our students are already at and where they need to grow, and then crafting curriculum from there. Currently, there is no state-recommended curriculum. That's probably still another 2 years out. And so the idea that the science project comes from is we're going to teach all the teachers in the district how to fish, so that they can do it on their own once we leave. And so that when somebody else comes along and says, hey, we have this great innovation to help your fishing, they'll have a better idea of what the district should spend money on and what should be adopted.
Just a clarification, there are 8 high school science teachers, there are 8 middle school science teachers. They are all being trained in this. The elementary is too many teachers, but we have the grade level chair K through 5 from each of the elementary schools that are being trained and will be lead teachers for the rest of the teachers at that site.
Yes?
This sounds like a philosophy that would be taught in all subjects, the method, not just science. So where is that going, or where will it end up, and where did this all start? In another country, another world?
Yeah, no. So the question is, this sounds like a great approach that can be taken in all subjects. Where did this method come from, and what is it based in, I believe. So the basis is really easy. The basis is just the research we've done on how students learn. Students learn best when they are actively engaged. It's the idea of theory of play behind elementary education, that students learn best when they're kind of in their natural habitat, playing, feeling, touching, learning, the same way that babies want to touch and feel and put everything in their mouths, right? Because they're experiencing the world for the first time. They're making sense of it. And as the research has progressed, we realize, well, it's not just for the elementary levels. It actually works at the middle school and the high school levels as well. So it's not really coming from any novel place. It's been stuff that we have known that has just been codified over the years with the additional research. And this is research that does apply to all core areas. I mean, you can do it in math, you can do it in English, social studies, you can do it in PE. It works for all of them. So I can only address science because that's my specialty, but I do know that there are, and most teachers do engage in some type of active learning at some point in time during their course. The goal here is to increase the amount of active time that is happening during each class period. Right here, and then we'll go in the back, and then right over to the middle.
Is there going to be also really a strong emphasis in the mathematics, especially in the elementary school, because the science really to really understand the fundamentals of the science, whether or not, when you get to the higher level, to look at, like, let's say, something orbiting the Earth. That's a lot of that is, let's say, calculus. Some of that, I'm wondering, the elementary schools, they're going to be a bigger emphasis on fundamental math, because by the time you get to the high school, the fundamental math is not there. I think that some of the science part would be fairly still hard to understand. I mean, you may get the concepts, like, when you see it, but to really understand what's happening, the math has to be there. So how are you going to do that? In other words, some of the memorization that, we're saying we like in elementary school, I think that the students really have to very quickly, be able to multiply and divide without thinking, and that's just part of the preparation. So how is that going to work?
Yeah, so the question is the preparation for math in relationship to science and how it might support that for higher level math when we get to high school, like calculus and calculus-based physics. I can't speak too much to the math, again, because I work primarily with science. I'll go back in the presentation here and look at the framework, which I know you can't see from where you're sitting, but if you look at just the bottom of the framework down here, that's where the NGSS framework has integrated the Common Core, specifically English and math, which is the core. And so science will be supporting math within it itself using the Common Core math standards. And those are also part of the science and engineering practices that we use. Again, that's just the perspective from science. And we do take some novel and different approaches because, again, we know that rote memorization is one of the least effective ways to learn these concepts. And so that's why you're seeing some different approaches when it comes to math. You're seeing new approaches to really try to instill number sense within students. Because it's one thing to know, what 3 times 3 is, and then it's another thing to know why 3 times 3 is what it is.
So what I meant is that at the elementary level, when they're very young, I think that a certain amount of just knowing it really quickly is important, so that you don't have to think about it later on. Just to be able to have that. I mean, they just have to know multiplication just like that, and not have to figure it out by counting when you're getting to 6th grade, let's say.
Yes.
Unless we have that base is really solid, I think it's difficult to implement this.
Okay, thank you.
Let's just limit it to 2 more questions.
Okay, yes. And I will stick around if anybody wants to ask questions personally at the end.
So you talked about how you're training all the teachers and, to make sure that they know how to basically implement the strategy to all the students. The question I have is how long is that a training period? And then what happens? Is there like some sort of a transition period where you guys are still there while the teachers are teaching to make sure that you memorize things back before you? Or how does, or are you just going to kind of leave it full term here?
Yeah. So the question is about the teachers and the partnership between CenterX, the science project specifically, and how we might assist teachers. So the CenterX vision is about transforming public school, and the science project vision is about transforming science education. And so with that, we actually do not take on every district that comes asking for a contract. We have a very specific requirement for districts, and just in a nutshell, that requirement is that it's a partnership. It's not a one and done. We're in constant communication. I talk to Lauren on a regular basis. I get emails every now and then from the teachers as they're working. So currently the contract is for 1 year. I mean, that's just logistically. We're not at the point in time where we might talk about a future partnership, but it is a, yeah.
The rest of that. Yeah, so we saw NGSS as a real need for our district. So the first thing I did is we hired Lauren to be the resident expert in the area. What Lauren did is he looked at all kinds of high-performing school districts and what we're doing with NGSS, what other districts are doing with NGSS. And that's when the name CenterX came out. And so we know some high-performing school districts and other school districts in the area using CenterX. So Lauren has now spent a lot of time on researching best practices for next generation standards implementation. When we brought CenterX in, we trained all of our science teachers, middle and high school, and they did 4 days last year. They're doing another 4 this year just with the CenterX folks. Then we also have elementary teacher grade level reps getting trained as well. So the model is really train the experts, and then next year during our PD days, that's our non-pupil days, we're going to continue to work on this because it does take a long time. It's training teachers to help students. So it's a process, but we're pleased with the partnership we have. It's not like we're just hiring them for this year and then we're not going to see them anymore.
I'd like to add also, CenterX, this is not part of their contract tonight. Matthew's here because they're determined to be partners with us. When we did a parent presentation for K-8 parents last week, That was not part of the contract. Lynn and Matthew were there because they want to see this work, they're committed to it, and they've also offered to do some other things that they're not getting paid for, but because they believe in what they're doing.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming, and
Thank you.